Okay, looking at where we are in the culture of America today, one of the things that is so lost is the truth of the American story. There's a lot of reasons for that, but let me point out the American story is much more diverse than most people have any idea about. In fact, if you look at the American Revolution, which I will contend America became a nation when we actually became a nation and separated from Great Britain, which didn't happen in 1619. It happened a lot of years later, 1776, when we did the Declaration, we separated from Great Britain. We have an original copy of the Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration of Independence. Now, original copy, let me throw a caveat to this, okay? So Jefferson, when he dies in 1826, they begin collecting his writings. In 1828, they get all of his writings together, and they found the original draft of the Declaration of Independence. At that point, they decided this is something we want to preserve, and actually other people might want to see this. So they did what's essentially known as like an ink lift. They put another document on top, they put a chemical on top, and they literally, on this new document, are pulling ink off of the original document. From that ink lift, they went and made copies. This is one of the copies that was made from the ink lift. Here's what's super interesting. Jefferson was on the Committee of Five that drafted the Declaration. On this document, it actually has places where there are lines marked out in it, and on the left, it actually says who was making the edit. So this one says Dr. Franklin, this one says Mr. Adams. So it's like a Google work document, right? Like literally, you are showing who's making the edit. Here's what's super interesting, is right now, there are states that are passing laws saying that we need to go back and learn the Declaration. We want our kids to learn the Constitution, to learn the Bill of Rights, so you will actually know the rights that you have and the limitations the federal government has. Right? Like, that would be a really good thing to know. A lot of people don't know that, and yet there are states saying that we don't want our kids to learn this. And one of the crazy things, by the way, Minnesota. If y'all aren't familiar with what happened in Minnesota and their state legislation, they passed a law, the governor signed it into law. Okay, so they passed legislation, governor signs it in, that said, for American history courses in Minnesota, they will no longer teach about the American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, or the Holocaust. They are replacing the curriculum with 1619 critical race theory, and they want to emphasize systemic white racism and privilege in America. Literally, they are removing this. Now, here's again why this is important, is because one of the things that they tell us is that, for example, in the original draft of the Declaration, or the Declaration itself, when Jefferson says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. You guys probably know part of this, right? You know the phrase. Here's what's interesting. They argue again. Oh yeah, you know the thing. We'll circle back to it, it's fine. So, I mean, I was just mocking, but it's fine. So, what's interesting about this is they argue that the Declaration is actually racist, because when Jefferson said that all men are created equal, he was only talking about white men. Okay, hang on. Here's what's important. That's page 1 and 2. Let's go to page 3 and 4. You can get online right now, and you can look up Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration. There are images of this online, and you can read the actual text. Here's what's important. In the actual text, if you remember the Declaration, it goes through and it lists our philosophy, our thoughts of government, but then it lists 27 grievances in the final draft of the Declaration, and it was the reasons we're separating from Great Britain. If you go back to the original draft, the longest grievance in the original draft, it is the biggest paragraph in the whole thing, it was Jefferson writing against slavery and the slave trade in America. Now, let me just read part of this to you. He says, he, meaning the king, he has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred right of liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere to incur miserable death in that transportation thither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian, and he underlines the word Christian, like this Christian, almost like air quotes, like this Christian king of Great Britain, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. Let me borrow this for a second. Okay, notice when he says men, what does that look like? It's all caps locks. He's talking about the slaves being brought to America, and he says he's keeping open a market where these men have been bought and sold. And then the next line he goes on, and actually no, hold it again, thank you. The next line below man, he says, where they should be bought and sold, he's prosecuted as negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit. Do you know the king stopped our legislation in America? We tried to end slavery in America. There were 4 colonies in America that in 1773 voted in their colonies against slavery. In 1774, the king vetoed all those laws. He said, you're British colonies. You can't end slavery. Here's what's interesting though. This is Jefferson's original draft. It didn't make it in the final draft. Why not? If you go back to the first page, on the first page, it says a declaration of the United States of America. The final draft says a unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. John Hancock, who was the president of Congress, he said we can only put in the declaration what everybody agrees to. Otherwise, the king will come and pull us apart by our own separate interests. We have to be unified. Thomas Jefferson said when he submitted the original draft, there were 2 states that opposed the anti-slavery clause. The 2 states were South Carolina and Georgia. And actually, and you can go back, and this is in the records, you can go read this. Those 2 states said, we haven't tried to end slavery at this point. That's not a problem. We have the king. We don't think that should be included. Here's what's more significant, though. 11 of the 13 colonies agreed with that grievance. The vast majority of America was not in the same position that some of the pro-slavery founding fathers were when it came to the position of slavery.